Hello everybody, welcome to Tangle 9. Today I get to write some code. So to start with, I need to use a tool called Spring Initializer, and this is going to help me set up my core project. So I'm going to choose Maven and Java. This is fine. I'm going to put in the domain that we created. And you see how it's backwards? That's just the way that Java does it. And I'll put Tangle here. And I'm going to just put in my tagline. All right, jar. Let's be bleeding edge and choose Java 21. As for starting dependencies, always pick Lombok. And I'll do Spring Web and we'll add the rest later. Click generate and it downloads it. So now open up my shell. I'm going to go to my work directory. I have my CV there. Tangle is there. Now let's just double check and see what's going on with Tangle. I added some new directories. So you can see I have designs, logos, and photos. I'm going to make an assets directory and put them all in there so it won't get too cluttered. Now you notice how when I did MV or move, it wanted to put a slash there, which would be stuff inside the directory. If you take the slash away, it's the directory itself. And now we just have the assets directory in my project directory. Now I happen to know that Spring Initializer creates a zip file that has this directory at its root. So I backed up one, cd ... and now I'm going to unzip that file. And you see it says tangle, 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 tangle. And so now I put it all into the tangle directory. There's an src source directory, a POM file, and these two that help you run Maven. Now I can just type in Tangle from now on to get to that directory. There we go. I'm going to get rid of help because this is just so you can see it's just a bunch of help for getting started with Spring. You can go to the website. One of the aliases I always put on every machine is, instead of typing this all the time, which gives you the detailed view of a directory, I use LL, which is the same thing, and it's not set up in Mac by default. So I'm going to put it in my bash rc file. Alias LL equals ls and save. And then you have to source the bash rc file to make it happen. So now if I go to Tangle and do LL, you can see it. Two things weren't showing before. So you see this git ignore file. We'll talk about that later. And then this Maven file. Here, I'm just going to open this. So here's source. It contains a main, and underneath that you have Java and then the package name. So you can see that com fractal tangle, and then it starts you off with a Tangle application. At the same level as Java, it has resources where we have application properties and then a static folder with nothing in it and a templates folder with nothing in it. Now at the same level as main, you have a test one, and that has likewise Java with the full package, and it has a sample test. So that's what Spring Initializer gives you. Now that I'm in my project directory, I'm going to type idea period. That means current directory, and that's going to open up idea. First I have to do trust, and now you can see over here all the files that I was just talking about. The most important file that got created for us is this POM file here. You can see with the blue M, which stands for Maven. So if I open that up, you can see this rather complicated looking XML file. that has configuration for the software project. First, let's go into the IntelliJ settings, which is this gear right up here, and click settings. There are two places where you can change the font. Here is appearance and behavior, appearance, and you can use a custom font. So this is going to cover the UI font. So if I make this like 16 and hit apply, it'll make everything bigger, but you notice that the editor didn't change. So I'll just leave this on 14. And if you go into editor and then font, this is for the editor font. So I'm going to make this just because it's going to be hard to read. Otherwise, I'll make it 16, hit OK. This POM file starts with XML gobbledygook, and then you can see that the group ID, artifact ID that I created on Spring Initializer show up here, and the name is here. It also automatically adds a version, which is going to be 001 snapshot. This is just where things start. You can see the Java version 21. And then this is where the dependencies start. This is where you're going to spend most of your time in a POM file. You can see I have Spring Boot, Lombok, and a test version for Spring Boot. As you can see, it's complaining that it doesn't have a Java JDK configured. So you can either click this setup button, or I'm going to show you how to get to where it goes. So click the gear icon and do project structure this time. So settings is for your global settings, regardless of project, and project structure has to do with the individual project. And then click on platform settings, SDKs. You can see that there are no SDKs. SDK is another way of saying JDK. And I'm going to click the plus and do download JDK. And I'm going to choose, instead of Oracle, I'm going to choose the Eclipse one. Hit download. All right, so it's added the JDK to IntelliJ, and I'm going to make sure that it's selected here under SDK in the project settings. Click OK. One thing that Spring Boot is known for is making things easy to get up and running. Contrary to what you might have seen if you tried to learn Java from pretty much any source, is that the all-important main method is not important. All it does is run Spring. And by putting this magic little annotation right here, Spring Boot application, Spring, when it starts, is going to look through all of your source code and wire things up automatically. This is called inversion of control, or IOC. And instead of procedurally putting things, first do this, then do this, then do this, you just tell Spring what you want to do, and it figures it out for you. So this is very convenient, but it can be a little bit confusing at the start if you're used to more traditional procedural programming. So what do I want to do? Well, I want to make an API. Let's start with the test. I'll open up Postman. I will create a collection, and I'll just call it Tangle for now. And now I want to make an API call. I click new up here, and it's going to be an HTTP request. And this is where you can choose what kind of HTTP action. I'm going to do a get, and then I'll put in the usual local development URL, which is localhost 8080. And for the API path, I'm going to follow convention of putting API /v1, and that's going to be the prefix that goes in front of all of our APIs. And then the category of API, so I'm going to call it entry. I'll put entry list. So when you do a get request to this URL, it should return a list of entries from the database. Click save, put it in Tangle, and here it is showing up over here. You can also rename it, which is often much easier. So if you just do entry list, so you can see this is a little easier to read, and this stays over here. Now, if I do send right now, there's nothing running. There's no server on my machine, so it's going to come back with an error. Could not send, connection refused. If I want something to come back, I need to create what's called a controller. So to do that, I'm going to go into source main Java and then make a new package for entry. Package entry. And all my entry related code is going to go in here. And the first thing we're going to do is make a Java class. One thing I always do is I create a short prefix for all the classes in a project. This helps when you're searching and replacing all sorts of different things. So rather than just call it, like entry controller, I'm going to put in tan. So for Tangle. Spring Boot is all about annotations. So we're going to add the annotation we need, which is going to be REST controller. And you can see that a couple of things just happened. IntelliJ is being really smart. First of all, when I was typing, it figured out what I wanted to do. I hit enter, and then it added a import for this REST controller annotation up top. To make my first API, I need a mapping. In this case, it will be a get mapping. And then in parentheses after this annotation, I put the URL that's going to map to this particular bit of code. So remember, it's API v1 entry list. And right underneath there, I make a method with a return type of collection. So two things. First is this name doesn't actually mean anything. Nothing's ever going to call that directly. The reason is that because of inversion of control, IOC, Spring looks for this and wires up the connection to this method without really using this name. You don't have to type this name anywhere else. So I want to have a class that represents an entry, and it'll be a POJO or plain old Java object. So I'm going to just call it tan entry. And because I want to use Lombok, which gets rid of a bunch of unnecessary getters and setters, you just put at data, and then I can just put in the fields within the class itself. So I could do string title, author, and I don't have to do getters and setters for this because Lombok gives it from this annotation. So I'm going to go back here. Now I can say it's a collection of tan entries. I can create a collection within the method. Notice when I use a class that hasn't been declared up here, IntelliJ is smart enough to say, hey, do you mean this? And so I'm going to hit Alt and Enter. I'm sorry, that's Option and Enter, but also called Alt. And it puts it right up here. So it did it for both collection and array list. And then down here, I'm going to return the result list. Oops, sorry. Now notice how IntelliJ is smart. It keeps telling me when I should do something different by making little visuals. It's really looking over your shoulder and trying to help you write better code. So for now, I'm not going to do anything with a database. I'm just going to create a dummy entry. So what this code does, first it makes a collection of entries, then it makes a sample entry, it sets the 3 fields of the entry, and then, oh, I have to add it to the list. Oop. And then we add it to the result list and return the result list. And this is all you need to make a REST web service. But don't take my word for it. Let's run Spring and try the API call. To do that, you go into the main class, Tangle application, and then up here, you click one of these. This is going to run without debugging enabled. This is going to run with debugging enabled. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And so now it's going to run the server. So it says Spring here. And then if it says down here at the bottom, start a Tangle application, that means we're ready. I'm going to go into Postman and click send. And there you have it. It did the get call and it returned my sample entry. Another way to verify that it's working is to go in to the controller class and let's put a breakpoint, a debugging breakpoint. So I'll just put it at the first line of this method. And because we're running in debug mode, when I run this API again, it stops here on this line. And if I hit F8 a few times, I can look at the variables as it goes through the method. So you can see right here, it created this tan entry, which has nulls for everything because nothing's been set yet. And as I click F8, it fills in the different pieces. And then it adds it. Right now we have a result list of 0. I hit F8 and it adds it to the list. To keep going, you can hit resume program or F9, and then it just keeps going past the breakpoint, and we can see that, yes, it returned this once again. All right, so we got an API and a server working. See you next time.